I took a quote from Mate and I put it in a newsletter the other day. So I'm going to, two of both of our obsessions, game theory and dating dynamics. So this was to do with slut-shaming. Female promiscuity has a tragedy of the commons effect in the mating market. If one woman offers blowjobs on the second date, it's harder for other women to keep them in reserve until the fourth date as their special treat. This creates a downward spiral of young women feeling like they have to offer more sex and to more guys just to stay in the mating game. Thus, slut-shaming is a way of enforcing a more restrained sexual norm on other women so that not all women have to become more promiscuous than any one of them would like. That shit fucking blew my mind.
And it's really, unless you have this kind of game theory perspective, it's really hard to understand why slut shaming is mostly done by women to other women.
Correct. It also makes a lot of sense around why women tend to be the enforcers of slut shaming because so frequently, because women are the ones who have an incentive to protect the sexual marketplace from becoming a price war of easy sex.
Yeah. And this is also why, the main opponents of sex work are often married women, right? Because they have the most to lose if husband goes off, and spends money on an escort or some financial dominatrix or whatever. And if you just ask, okay, where are people's incentives? What's the incentive to impose a certain social norm on human sexuality? Often it's not that hard to figure out why it's happening.
There's another case. I did a little bit of research around who opposes abortions mostly, and it's women. There are more women that oppose abortions than there are men.
And I think a lot of that might be a bit of a virtue signal, right? Because if you're a woman who's like, babies are sacred, we have to protect babies, it's kind of like a way of saying my maternal instincts are better than yours, and I'm going to be a good mom. And one way I demonstrate I will be a good and devoted mom who will, protect your babies is to insult other women who seem not to protect their fetuses.
That's the first half of it, right? That's what you guys put forward in the book. And then I worked it through using bro science on my newsletter. Reading that first section about the fact that women enforce it mostly and why you can't have the price of sexual access kind of get spiraled down and down. Reading that got me thinking about the equivalent for men, and I think that it explains simp shaming too. So I reword what you put at the top. Male resource commitment has a tragedy of the commons effect in the mating market. If one man offers gifts and resources by the second date, it's harder for the other men to keep them in reserve until the fourth date as their special treat. This creates a downward spiral of young men feeling like they have to offer more and more gifts and go on increasingly extravagant dates to more and more women just to stay in the mating game. Thus, simp shaming is a way of enforcing a more restrained resource-giving norm on other men so that not all men have to become more resource-committed than any of them would like. Similarly, this explains why men are mostly the enforcers of simp shaming, because men have an incentive to stop simps from cheapening the value of all men's resources. It's hardly an iron law. Men call women sluts and women call men simps all the time, but this game theory explanation makes a lot of sense to me. If women give sex without commitment, it cheapens the value of sex. If men give resources or commitment without sex, it cheapens the value of resources and commitment.
Yeah, and you can see this in some weird little subcultures like financial domination, right? Where you might not be familiar with this, but there's a certain kind of online sex worker who's just like, I'm the dominatrix, you send me money. Men who fetishize supporting women will just send these women like thousands, tens of thousands of dollars.
Oh, and they sometimes they drip feed it back to them as an allowance and stuff, right?
Yeah, and I don't really get it, but like whatever. As long as you're not like a married guy and you're taking money out of your mortgage account and sending it to some other random woman. But whenever other guys hear about guys who are into being financially dominated, like that's like the ultimate simp. And then the teasing is like relentless. I think there's even a bit of stigma about men who visit sex workers for the same reason. It's like, how much are you paying? Like, why can't you just go to, Chris's club and pick up a woman for free, whatever. But I think this is what, cultural norms it's often our attempts to kind of control the mating dynamics of other people.
Why do you think it is that men who work on their charisma or their abilities with women in like an overt conscious way, why do you think it is that there's a bit of an ick factor sometimes around that, both from men and women?
I think it's a funny thing. I don't know how much of that is kind of unique to like this particular cultural moment in like British and American mating dynamics. I don't know how much of it is just a sort of like innate wariness of any guys who give off cues of being kind of Machiavellian or sociopathic or narcissistic, right? There's this concept of the dark triad, personality traits, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, narcissism. And so the guys who are high on those dark triad traits do tend to care a lot about like good body, how they dress, how they act, maximizing like cues of dominance and status that they display and kind of parlaying that into mating success. But, the guys who really benefit from like reading Mate or reading Manosphere stuff are not typically those dark triad guys. They're more often guys who are kind of like a little socially awkward and aspy like me, or like I used to be and still am, where it's like, I just don't understand women. I don't understand clothing. How do I get in shape? What is a conversation? And like doing kind of remedial work on that, I think is, that's a huge win, because there's a lot of guys out there with amazing potential that's not realized. Why? Because K through 12 public education doesn't teach any of this stuff. Why would it? Male mentors, like guys' dads and uncles, don't seem to be bothering to teach it.
Well, I think as well, the gap between that generation and where we are now in terms of what you need to know in order to be effective in the mating market. This is one of the common criticisms thrown around at some of the guys in the manosphere that, bro, you've been married for fucking 40 years. Like you literally got into a relationship during a different, like a prehistoric era.
Yeah, I think that is like 50% accurate and 50% like a bullshit cope, because human nature doesn't change that much.
Yep, I agree.
Generation to generation. It might be true that a lot of guys, dads and granddads and uncles, didn't actually have that much like mating experience themselves, right? They might not have actually had that many girlfriends. They might have only been in the mating market for like 2 years before they married someone as a college sophomore, right? So they might not know what they're talking about. But on the other hand, to the extent that they've had real life experience and mating experience, there's no expiration date on human wisdom about sexuality.
What's happening, people? If you enjoyed that, then press here for the full, unedited episode. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.